Iran claimed it had struck 85 American military sites across Bahrain and Kuwait, a number seemingly designed to project strength and parity after a brutal night of American strikes. But when you actually add up what the United States hit across 2 consecutive nights of retaliation, the real total came out to roughly 170 separate targets inside Iran itself. 85 claimed versus 170 confirmed. That gap alone tells you almost everything about how lopsided this latest round of the war between Washington and Tehran has actually become. And the details behind both numbers make the real story even more devastating for Iran than the simple math suggests. Let's walk through exactly how we got to these numbers, because the sequence matters just as much as the totals themselves. On Tuesday, July 7th, Iran attacked 3 separate commercial vessels transiting the Strait of Hormuz. The Qatari LNG tanker Al Rekayat was struck and caught fire, triggering an engine room blaze with risk of explosion. The Saudi crude tanker Wedian was also hit, and a third vessel was struck by an Iranian drone off the coast of Oman. Iranian state television claimed the LNG tanker had come under attack after ignoring warnings, though Tehran stopped short of formally claiming responsibility for the assault itself. A second vessel, identified by sources speaking to Reuters as a Saudi-flagged crude oil tanker, was separately damaged when the IRGC fired missiles directly at commercial shipping in the strait. Washington's response came fast and hit hard. CENTCOM completed a new round of offensive strikes against Iran that same night, hitting over 80 targets with precision munitions as an immediate response to Iran's latest attacks on commercial shipping. According to a U.S. official who spoke with Reuters, American forces struck Iranian air defense systems, coastal surveillance infrastructure, surface-to-air missiles, anti-ship cruise missiles, and drone launch sites. If you're new here, go ahead and like and subscribe now, because this channel breaks down every twist in this rapidly escalating conflict, and what happened over the following 48 hours turned this into one of the most consequential exchanges of the entire war. Multiple videos geolocated by CNN showed explosions and large fires breaking out in the Iranian port city of Bandar Abbas. Iranian state media separately reported explosions on Karg Island, an absolutely critical hub for Tehran's oil exports that typically handles roughly 90% of the country's total crude oil shipments. U.S. officials have previously described Karg Island as the nexus for all of Iran's oil supply, meaning striking anywhere near that specific location carries enormous economic weight far beyond the immediate physical damage inflicted. Additional explosions were reported on Keshem Island, Iran's largest island in the Persian Gulf, and a location widely considered part of the country's broader arch defense system protecting the approach to the Strait of Hormuz. President Trump personally approved this summit in Ankara, Turkey, ordering the operation after convening top officials Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, and Joint Chiefs OF Staff Chairman General Dan Kane. Standing alongside NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte at that same summit, Trump delivered what became one of the most consequential statements of this entire war. For me, he said, I think it's over, referring directly to the fragile ceasefire that had governed relations between Washington and Tehran since the previous month. As far as I'm concerned, he added, it's just a waste of time. Trump went further, stating he no longer believed Tehran was negotiating in good faith, directly accusing Iranian leaders of privately agreeing to terms only to publicly deny them shortly afterward. Iran's response to all of this destruction followed an entirely predictable script. Iranian military leaders pledged what they called a crushing response to the American strikes, vowing they would not allow foreign interference in the management of the Strait of Hormuz. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps later announced it had targeted 85 U.S. military sites across Bahrain and Kuwait, specifically naming the U.S. Fifth Fleet headquarters in Bahrain and Ali Al Salem Air. Base in Kuwait among the locations struck through what Tehran described as joint naval and aerospace forces conducting multiple missile and drone waves. The Iranian army separately claimed a drone attack specifically targeting American forces at the Sheikh Issa Air Base in Bahrain. If you're finding this breakdown useful, make sure you're subscribed, because the actual verification, or lack of it, behind Iran's dramatic claim reveals something crucial about how this entire information war is playing out. Here's the detail that changes everything about how you should read that 85-site claim. No independent confirmation of casualties, damage, or even the actual execution of these specific attacks was reported through any credible tracking source. CENTCOM itself did not issue any statement addressing the Iranian claims directly. This pattern, Iranian responses that dramatically exceed in scope what subsequent independent reporting actually manages to confirm, has held consistently since the earliest days of this war back in late February and March. By contrast, the American strikes and their targets were reported and geolocated by multiple independent news organizations and satellite imagery analysts, giving Washington's side of this exchange a level of independent verification that Iran's competing claims simply never achieved. That's the first crack in Iran's 85 number. But the story gets considerably worse for Tehran once you account for what happened next. CENTCOM didn't stop after that first wave of roughly 80 targets. American forces launched an additional round of strikes on July 8th, hitting approximately 90 more Iranian military targets in a follow-up operation, specifically aimed at further degrading Iran's ability to attack commercial shipping and civilian mariners throughout the Strait of Hormuz. Add that second wave to the first, and you arrive at the real total driving the comparison at the heart of this story. Roughly 80 targets on the first night, plus approximately 90 more on the second, comes out to somewhere around 170 separate Iranian military targets struck by the United States across just 2 consecutive nights of coordinated operations. 170 confirmed, independently verified strikes against 85 unconfirmed Iranian claims. That's not a close contest by any reasonable measure. The gap becomes even more significant once you consider the specific composition of what actually got hit. The first wave alone included more than 60 Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps small boats, the exact fast attack vessels Iran had relied on throughout this entire war to threaten and harass commercial shipping in the Strait. Losing that many vessels in a single operation represents a devastating blow to Iran's core naval harassment strategy, one that goes well beyond simple target counting and strikes directly at Iran's fundamental capacity to continue contesting the waterway going forward. Iran didn't stop trying to project strength after this exchange either, launching yet another wave of attacks the following day. On July 9th, Iran's military announced it had launched one-way attack drones against sites in Kuwait, Qatar, and Bahrain, marking the first time since the recent ceasefire that Tehran officially acknowledged targeting Qatar directly. The Iranian army specifically claimed it had hit a Patriot missile interceptor system in Kuwait, an early warning system in Qatar, and fuel tanks in Bahrain, using what state media described as a large number of various types of army kamikaze drones. Kuwait's defense ministry confirmed at least one person was injured in these attacks, describing the individual's condition as stable, and stated that 3 ballistic missiles, 1 cruise missile, and 10 drones launched from Iran had been successfully intercepted and neutralized, though it acknowledged some damage was caused to several locations during those interception efforts. That detail matters enormously for understanding the true scorecard here. Kuwait's own defense ministry, an independent, verifiable source with no incentive to inflate American success or downplay Iranian capability, confirmed successful interception of the vast majority of Iran's July 9th missile and drone barrage. When you compare that kind of transparent, independently confirmed interception record against Iran's own unverified claim of striking 85 American sites just one day earlier, the contrast becomes almost impossible to ignore. One side's claims are getting confirmed by neutral third parties documenting successful defense. The other side's claims remain entirely unsubstantiated more than a day after they were first announced. Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, Iran's parliamentary speaker and chief negotiator with the United States, offered his own defiant public response to this entire exchange, declaring that America still hasn't learned that bullying and breaking promises are no longer cost-free. That statement captures the broader rhetorical strategy Iran's leadership has consistently deployed throughout this war, reframing every military setback as evidence of continued Iranian resolve, rather than acknowledging the increasingly one-sided nature of these exchanges. Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi simultaneously worked to build international support, holding separate phone calls with counterparts from Pakistan, Turkey, and Oman, warning Pakistan's army chief against what he characterized as further condemning the U.S. strikes as a violation of the broader Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding governing the ceasefire. The economic dimension of this exchange deserves equal attention alongside the military scorecard, because Washington didn't limit its response to military strikes alone. The Trump administration simultaneously reimposed sanctions on Iranian oil sales, reversing economic relief Tehran had gained through the original memorandum signed back on June 29th. The Treasury Department revoked its sanctions waiver effective immediately, establishing a wind-down deadline of July the 17th for all Iranian oil production, delivery, and sales activity. Alexei Plitzas, director of the counterterrorism program at the Atlantic Council, characterized this as the United States upping the ante by combining renewed sanctions with military strikes simultaneously, arguing that previous, more limited American responses to Iranian ceasefire violations had proven insufficient to actually deter Iran from launching additional attacks. Former U.S. Middle East envoy Dennis Ross offered perhaps the most cutting assessment of Iran's overall strategic position throughout this exchange, arguing that the IRGC's continued attacks on commercial shipping had directly undercut President Trump's own broader efforts to reopen the Strait of Hormuz to normal international traffic. That observation captures something important about the strategic logic driving this entire cycle of escalation. Every time Iran launches an attack designed to project strength and maintain leverage over the strait, it simultaneously undermines whatever remaining diplomatic goodwill might have existed toward eventually reaching a more permanent, comprehensive settlement, virtually guaranteeing an escalating American response that leaves Iran in a measurably weaker position than before the original provocation occurred. Let's dig deeper into why Iran would even make a claim this specific, naming 85 sites when it must have known independent verification would prove nearly impossible to obtain in real time. Military analysts who study Iranian information warfare tactics point to a consistent explanation that's held throughout this entire conflict. Precise sounding numbers carry an inherent credibility that vague statements simply don't. Saying Iran struck 85 American sites sounds far more authoritative and convincing to a domestic Iranian audience than saying Iran launched a large retaliatory operation against American forces in the Gulf. The specificity itself functions as a rhetorical tool designed to project competence and precision, regardless of whether that precision reflects anything that actually happened on the ground. This tactic has proven remarkably durable throughout the war, precisely because verification in an active conflict zone remains genuinely difficult, even for sophisticated international news organizations and open source intelligence analysts. Bahrain and Kuwait, unlike Iran itself, are considerably more accessible to international journalists and maintain closer working relationships with Western media outlets, which theoretically should make confirming or denying Iranian strike claims against targets in those countries easier than confirming claims about strikes deep inside Iranian territory. Yet even with that relative accessibility advantage, independent confirmation of Iran's 85 site claim failed to materialize within the crucial first day after the announcement, a delay that matters enormously in an information environment where initial claims often shape public perception, regardless of whether they're later confirmed, revised, or quietly abandoned. It's worth examining the specific targets Iran claims to have hit, because the selection itself reveals something about Tehran's strategic. A president stands on a stage in front of every major NATO leader on Earth and casually threatens to shut off the lights across an entire country. No warning shots, no diplomatic cushioning, just a direct threat to Iran's power grid, said out loud in public at the most important military alliance summit of the year. And for a moment afterward, Tehran barely said a word. This just happened, and the silence that followed might be the most telling part of the entire story. To really appreciate how serious this moment is, it helps to understand exactly why the Strait of Hormuz matters so much in the first place. This narrow waterway carries roughly 1/5 of the entire world's daily oil supply through an extremely tight shipping channel. Any disruption there does not stay contained to the Middle East. It ripples outward almost instantly into gas prices, shipping insurance costs, and broader inflation concerns for countries thousands of miles away. That is exactly why Iran's ability to threaten this specific waterway has become such a powerful bargaining chip throughout this entire conflict. It is one of the very few tools Iran has that can genuinely threaten the global economy rather than just the immediate region. This latest confrontation did not emerge out of nowhere either. The broader war between the United States, Israel, and Iran has been running for months at this point through multiple phases of open conflict, ceasefires, and renewed fighting. Iran's supreme leader was killed earlier in this conflict, an event that reshaped the entire internal power structure inside Tehran. A memorandum of understanding was eventually signed in mid-June, establishing a shaky 60-day ceasefire 2 weeks before beginning to unravel. Exactly the kind of unraveling that led directly to this moment at the NATO summit. Let's set the scene properly, because the location and timing of this threat matter just as much as the words themselves. This happened at the NATO summit in Ankara, Turkey, in early July. Trump was there for days of meetings, mostly focused on European defense spending and alliance unity, but Iran completely hijacked the sitting in those meetings. The fragile ceasefire between the United States and Iran was falling apart in real time, thousands of miles away. Here's what triggered it. Iran had been accused of attacking commercial ships passing through the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most important oil shipping routes in the entire world. The United States responded. That is when things escalated fast. Standing at that same summit, Trump renewed a threat that goes far beyond typical military targets. He said the United States may strike Iran's electric plants and desalination facilities, the exact infrastructure that keeps lights on and clean water flowing for millions of ordinary Iranian civilians. His exact words were, quote, "I don't want to do that, but if we have to, we'll take them out." Think about what that actually means. Electric plants and desalination facilities are not military bases. They are not missile storage sites. They are civilian infrastructure, the kind of targets that international law generally treats very differently from legitimate military objectives. Targeting critical civilian infrastructure like water and power plants can, under many interpretations of international law, be considered a war crime. And here was the President of the United States casually mentioning it as a live option on a public stage in front of the entire NATO alliance. There is a reason legal experts and humanitarian organizations pay such close attention whenever a leader threatens civilian infrastructure specifically. Power grids keep hospitals running. Desalination plants provide drinking water to entire cities in a region where fresh water is already scarce. When those systems go down, the damage does, and not stay limited to soldiers or military assets. It spreads directly into hospitals, homes, and daily life for millions of ordinary people who have no control over the decisions being made by their own government or by a foreign president threatening them from thousands of miles away. This is precisely why international humanitarian law treats civilian infrastructure differently from military targets, and why threats like this one tend to draw immediate scrutiny from human rights organizations and international legal experts whenever they are made. This was not the first time Trump had floated this exact kind of threat either. Just months earlier, during an even earlier phase of this conflict, Trump had given Tehran a 48-hour ultimatum threatening in a post on social media to, quote, obliterate the country's power plants if Iran did not reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Back then, Iran's military's command responded almost immediately, with a spokesman for Iran's Khatam al-Anbiya command warning that if Iran's fuel and energy infrastructure was attacked, then, quote, fuel, energy, information technology systems, and desalination infrastructure used by America and its allies in the region would be struck in return. Iran's parliament speaker doubled down publicly too, warning that critical infrastructure across the entire region would be, in his words, irreversibly destroyed, with oil prices rising for a long time as a direct result. Iranian state media at the time described the developments as having solidified what officials called a new military and strategic doctrine, insisting that the Strait of Hormuz would reopen strictly, according to Iran's own arrangements, and explicitly rejecting the idea of any new shipping route being established outside that framework. That kind of layered, multi-source messaging, military spokesperson, parliament speaker, and state media, all reinforcing the same defiant position within the same news cycle, is a clear sign of a coordinated national response. It stands in sharp contrast to what came later. So there was precedent here. Iran had already promised, in very specific and threatening times, specifically naming electric plants and desalination facilities directly. Iran's public response was noticeably quieter than expected. According to reporting from NPR, following this specific round of American strikes and Trump's public threats, Iran's reaction was described directly as muted. That is a striking contrast from the fiery, immediate threats Iran had issued in earlier months. Analysts pointed to a very specific reason for that shift. The Trump administration had recently revoked oil waivers that had allowed Iran to sell crude despite sanctions. And combined with newly reimposed restrictions, that move reportedly threatened to strip Iran of tens of billions of dollars in potential oil revenue and unfrozen financial assets. On top of that, Iran was also reportedly at risk of losing access to a $300 billion investment fund tied to broader negotiations. In other words, Iran had enormous financial incentive to avoid escalating things further in the exact moment Trump was making these threats.